Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation's LNTV. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. There's a few things in the news this week that have been blowing my mind, and to help us unravel this, we have Liberty Nation's legal affairs correspondent and man about town, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza. Good to have you on board, Scott.
Cheers, Mark.
Well, Scott, it's been a whirlwind week for legal stories, and there's two in particular that have caught my eye. The first being about the government looking into secure data of individuals who own and use a particular app for their rifle scopes. Can you give us a brief rundown on what this is?
Well, we don't know exactly what it is because it's still clouded in secrecy. This has to do with a Department of Justice application before a court in order to force the Apple iTunes Store and the Google Play Store to turn over users of an app called Obsidian 4. And that app is used presumably primarily by the users of a certain type of scope, a rifle scope, produced by this company called American Technologies Network. Now, they developed the app for use with their scope. So while you don't have to buy the scope to buy the app, or rather to download the app, we presume that's who's using it. And Forbes magazine broke the story that the Justice Department is now seeking information about the users or the downloaders of that app.
Okay, now why would the Justice Department want this information?
Okay, certain types of, it's funny, while guns themselves are, you could export a gun, you could buy any gun in the United States that an American would be legally able to own under federal law and export that to any other country that would allow you to then import it into their country, right? But for actual technology-based gun accessories, there are many that Americans are freely able to go and buy and use without even as much as any kind of a permit or license or anything, like these scopes are. Anybody with a lot of money, and they are quite expensive, Mark, these are very, very high-end scopes. Anybody with a lot of money could go buy as many of these as they want and use them as they please in the United States. But if you have a contact outside of the United States and you want to send it to them, many of them are forbidden from doing so. Americans would be forbidden from doing so because of export regulations on arms, even though it's not obviously an arm, it's an accessory. But in any case, it's called the ITAR regulations, International Trade something in arms. And that's what this has to do with, very likely. But again, we don't know for sure yet because this is some breaking news and the government hasn't told us what they're doing yet.
Okay, I mean, to me, this seems like an infringement, really, on individuals' right to privacy, and also a bit of a warning shot against the Second Amendment. As a constitutional lawyer, what do you make of it?
Well, it is an infringement, which is why they're not able to just do it. They have to go to a court, and essentially that process works like this. The government says, we understand this is an infringement, but extraordinary circumstances demand that we're allowed to make this infringement. Now, that would be warm comfort in place of a robust and skeptical judiciary. Sadly, I don't think that's what we have in the United States. Instead, more like a rubber stamp for so many things. Now, we'll have to see. I don't want to prejudge the judiciary's bad response to this, Mark. We'll have to wait for it and then criticize it after they get it wrong rather than beforehand. But in any case, it is an infringement, and I think all the parties would recognize it. But the legal mechanism would allow for the imposition of that infringement as circumstances warrant.
Okay, just to finish up this particular topic, now, I had not heard that you could get an app that goes with your rifle scope. Is this possibly just the greatest marketing scam ever perpetuated?
You know, I consider myself not sort of like on the bleeding edge of firearms technology, but I have a keen interest in it, and I was not aware quite the capabilities of this. It does make sense, meaning at the high end of the marketplace, why not integrate these technologies to the extent they can be done so very well? And to be clear, you know, the app doesn't commit any act of murder or terrorism or shoot a gun or anything. It allows the recording of video and the importation of data. And for very long range, highly technical shooting, that data becomes important. Windage and elevation and all the rest of it for, I don't even want to use the word because it's like a, sort of a boogeyman, but like a sniper type shot with that sort of distance. It actually can be practical in the sense of not having to do a lot of that math in and of itself. But at the moment, it's just a high-end, very fascinating bit of kit, as you Brits say, for the long-range shooter.
Another story that caught my eye on this, that I see as tied in ever so slightly there, is one based on the California's Posse Comitatus Act. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And that's been repealed in California. Now, it's an old law, I believe, that requires anybody over the age of 18 and who is able-bodied to assist a law enforcement officer in an arrest or in something if they're called upon to do so. Is that about right?
Well, I think that's about right. This was relatively new to me when I first learned about the repeal by Liberty Nation author Jim Fight, who was writing about it. The notion that a person should be required to do anything, in other words, require affirmative action by them in any measure, is generally anathema to U.S. law. So it was surprising to me that to learn that it was on the books and in force.
So what's the story behind the repeal? Is it, from a liberty perspective, is it a good thing, a bad thing?
It's always a good thing, Mark, when antiquated laws are taken off the books. I think the people should actually have law books. I mean, maybe I'm really crazy in this regard, but I think that a person should actually be able to go and read the laws that they're expected to be subjected to and suffer criminal penalties for not obeying. And so I think that our law books should actually be understandable by a person of ordinary intelligence and interest. So just on that sort of that basis alone, I think it's a good move. But yes, the idea, even though I think, Mark, that this law is very likely unconstitutional and would have been held to be unconstitutional if somebody were criminally convicted of it and then challenged it, we shouldn't have a process where that's the case. If we understand a law to be wrong or unconstitutional, in this case, I think it's both, we should, go ahead and remove it. And so I think it's welcome news.
Yeah, the point that Jim Fight made in his article on Liberty Nation was that it's actually the police don't have, under the law, they don't have a responsibility to actually protect your
Well, certainly,
life.
Mark. Yeah. So if people aren't aware of this, it's sort of been so beaten into me that I sometimes forget that other people don't understand this. The police are under no legal obligation to help you. So literally, a police officer could be getting a cup of coffee next to you while somebody is robbing the coffee stand and taking your watch off your wrist. And while they may do something, they're under no legal duty to do something, and you can't then sort of sue them or sort of basically challenge their authority legally in any way for not acting. So that's what made it especially problematic and troublesome to read, Mark, in this California law. Only, again, this is a California state law, that citizens were under the duty to help police. It's through the looking glass craziness. And I think, as I said in my quote for that piece, these guys have the best health care that the taxpayers can give them. They've got fantastic benefits and often excellent pay, and yet they're not under obligation to lift a finger to help somebody in need. But yet the citizen is somehow, the encumbrance is placed on him to step into the fray and help law enforcement.
Scott, thanks very much for elucidating these two interesting cases this week. We appreciate you being on as always. Many thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
And thank you to you at home for watching. If you enjoyed this, if you learned something, please click subscribe below, subscribe to the channel, it helps us a lot. If you did enjoy it, head over to libertynation.com, where we have more articles, more TVs, more radio, podcasts, and we even have the Uprising podcast hosted by Mr. Scott D. Cosenza himself, who will take you through the legal minefield of the world. Many thanks.